please have a seat. So online we have tonight, we have, just let me close this one, the prayer. I'm going to open this. Okay, online, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so you'll hear them from the back. Okay, just make sure to keep yourselves muted all the time, please, because I'm not with you tonight to keep muting you guys. So please, so you'll see that we will have more numbers coming, and you will be hearing them when if they have questions in the back. Please only unmute yourselves when you want to ask a question, and I will leave you between the hands of Robert Haddad. Allah يقويكم وعلى أجركم.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you again for having me here. It's always a delight to do any talk anywhere. It's always a gift from God to be given the opportunity to present on something of value for our faith. Thank you for coming tonight. Of course, it's a cold and wet night. I'm told that normally this room is full on Monday nights, but look, it's a great turnout anyway, so thank you. And I can see a great turnout online as well. Now, I've been asked to speak about this topic, which I've never spoken on before. My collection of topics now number about 335 that I've spoken on since 1996. But I was very happy and excited to speak about this topic on scrupulosity. And the reason why is because I had a very severe case of it myself a very long time ago. So about the first half of my presentation tonight is to tell you about my personal experience. And then I'm going to unpack a bit of the theology, the basic theology with respect to scrupulosity, what it is and how we cure it. Now, today in our modern times, the big problem is not scrupulosity. The big problem is the opposite, laxity, where people don't care about sin, where people just free to do whatever they want, any way they want. They don't care about what's right or wrong, what's moral or immoral, okay? And it's, if it feels good, you just do it. That's the big problem we have today, not just in the church, but even more so in the world in general, where a world that actually doesn't believe in sin. And if it does believe in sin, it rejoices, it revels in sin. So that's the major problem. So I think laxity is 99.9% of the problem. Scrupulosity is at the other extreme, but it only affects a tiny minority of people. But of course, as a percentage of those who practice their faith, it definitely affects more of a percentage of those people than the general population. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if there are people in this room now, and certainly people in our online audience, who to some degree or another have suffered scrupulosity, whether they realize it or not. So where does the word scrupulosity come from? What is its origin? Its origin is from a Latin word, scrupuli, which means little stones. Because in the marketplaces of ancient Rome, when they weighed things, give me a pound of this or half a pound of that, and when they weighed it, they'd use stones as their weights. And often when they wanted to get it exactly right, you put the big stones first, and then the medium stone, and then the little ones to get it exactly right. I want it exactly 1 pound. Well, to get it exactly 1 pound, you have to put the little stones there. And now the scrupuli. So people who are scrupulous worry excessively about little things, little sins. Essentially, scrupulosity is a psychological disorder, but it's based on bad formation and also a very distorted or underdeveloped image of God. I was cured of it relatively quickly. Even though I had a severe case, I was cured of it because I simply was sent a chapter of a book from a friend of mine in America at the time. And that book I reread just in preparation for this presentation. It's The Spiritual Life by Alphonse Tanqueray. It's a classic, a great classic of the 20th century. It's only, and the chapter on scrupulosity is only about 7 or 8 pages. But when I read that, I was cured very quickly. But what is the cure? It wasn't reading the book, reading that chapter. The cure was finding out from that chapter what I needed to do in order to be cured of scrupulosity. Now, in my personal story, I was always a Catholic, but I did not have a good upbringing. I'm not blaming anyone. There was the times, the 70s, the early 70s. I did not go to a Catholic school. If I had, I don't know if I would have been any better off anyway. I was baptized as I should have been as an infant. My preparation for Holy Communion was simply being measured for a white suit. I was in Lebanon at the time. I was 8 years of age, and my mother, she had a sister, an older sister who was a nun, a Vincentian nun, who ran an orphanage for over 60 years in the Shuf region of Lebanon. And they just said, okay, Robert has to be prepared for his first Holy Communion. So the preparation, there was no catechesis in the preparation. It was just assumed that I knew something when I didn't. And I was measured up for white suit. So that was my preparation for Holy Communion. I did not have the sacrament of confirmation until I was an adult, 22 years of age. I had volunteer catechists coming into Greenacre Primary and Punchbowl Boys. They gave me good input. I had a strong conversion experience at the age of 15 when I went to the Billy Graham Crusade at Randwick Racecourse in 1979. And I had some regular contact with non-Catholic Christians, Baptists, Sydney Anglicans in my senior years of high school and my years at Sydney Law School. The Catholic input I had at that time was very patchy, very weak, very inconsistent. Why am I giving you this? Because I'm leading up to my Catholic conversion, which happened at the age of 21 going on 22. I had trauma in my studies. I'm prone to a number of conditions because the underlying condition I have is OCD, but it's a very, very deep case of OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorders and obsessional thinking underpins the various manifestations of disorders I had from time to time. Where I am now in my life, in my early 60s, is that I've got it all under control. Because knowledge is power. And when you have knowledge, you gain self-confidence. Fear is driven out. You master it, so everything is now under control, thanks God. But it wasn't for many, many years or even decades. So scrupulosity was a manifestation, one particular manifestation of the underlying condition which I had, which was OCD and obsessional thinking. When I had my Catholic conversion, it was very, very strong because I had contact with very strong traditionalist Catholics, not Maronites, not Eastern Catholics, but Latin Rite, very conservative and Latin Mass going Catholics. And at the time, it was exciting. And I gained a lot from them. I still thank God that I met them and had contact with them because they helped me escape from the vagaries and the confusion and the inconsistencies that I had in my spirit, in my practice and in my knowledge. So because I met them, I grew exponentially in my faith practice, my life, my knowledge, everything. In the years 1986, 87, 88, when I was 22, 23, 24. So I began to pray the rosary daily. I began to pray other devotions daily. I began to go to, from mid-87, well, from Lent 87 onwards, daily Mass. I'm reading a lot every day. So my life is changing radically and for the better. They're very exciting and wonderful times for me. The problem I had, which I didn't realize at that time, is that I didn't have a good, intelligent, spiritual director. I had friends, I had great friends that inspired me and, encouraged me to, be more, do more, this, that, everything. And so I was, like I'm now 100% full on Catholic, etc. And apologetics was part of it. Though the practice of my apologetics was rather very aggressive, very angry, very hostile. I turned 100% hostile against Protestantism, even though I had Protestant input for 6 years, Baptists and Anglicans. When I became this traditionalist Catholic, I declared war on all forms of Protestantism. I still have a theological, philosophical, and scriptural hostility to all forms of Protestantism, but you have to treat human beings with dignity and respect and love and charity. And conversions do not come from angry encounters, intellectual debates, arguments, beating people in your arguments, insults, raised voices, arguments. The Holy Spirit does not operate in that context. So here's a word of advice to any of us here who might be interested in apologetics. Go for it strong. But remember that apologetics is about winning souls, not arguments. The arguments have to be there, absolutely, but they got to be packaged in respect, in charity, because that person who's opposite you is a victim. Is a victim of prejudice, a victim of distortion, misrepresentation, even lies when it comes to Catholicism, but they just don't realize it. And you have to help them escape from that. And you only can do that if you build friendship and trust in your interactions with non-Catholics. So I just throw that in as a tangent point here. But I lacked the intelligent spiritual direction. So what was the core matter that caused me to fall into scrupulosity? Well, firstly, my life was changing. So it was changing in so many ways, and I was wanting to move away from sin. So what sinful practices I was engaged in of all different types, I wanted to purge myself of that. I wanted, working with God's grace through prayer, through the sacraments and good friendships a conversion means not just something intellectual, but the whole life has to change. And so, by the age of 22, 23, 24, you've already led a life of sinful practices for a long time. So sin has become habitual. So you have to break that. And you break habits by replacing them with other habits. So it takes time. And also because I was determined to be a strong practicing Catholic, I was fearful of falling back, backsliding, returning to my old ways. And so I was fearful of sin. And this is and it's good to be fearful of sin. You want to do good and avoid evil, no matter what state you are psychologically or spiritually. And so being so fearful of sin and wanting to go to daily mass was the crux of my problem. I wanted to be certain every day when I went to communion that I was in a state of grace. And if I felt I wasn't in a state of grace, if I had thought something or done something, said something that was in my mind sinful, and I wasn't sure whether it was mortal sin or not, if I wasn't certain that I was in a state of grace, I could not go to communion. And that reached a crescendo where there was 1 week in my life in the first half of 1989 where I felt the need to go to confession 5 times in 6 days. The sacrament of confession. Not just doing an act of contrition, which we should all do every day. It's part of a normal, healthy spiritual life. But I was just so within myself, all uptight, all twisted, all knotted, that I don't know. I thought this, I did this, I said this. Was it mortal sin or not? I'm not sure. And if I wasn't sure that it wasn't a mortal sin, I could not go to communion. That was the problem I had. The cure was simple. According to this chapter that my friend sent to me from the book written by Alphonse Tanqueray, I needed to bind myself to an intelligent and faithful spiritual director. I'd lost, with scrupulosity, you lose your balance and you lose your ability to judge sin and the gravity of sin objectively. So when you've fallen into this condition, minor faults become venial sins. Venial sins are mortal sins. Mortal sins are unforgivable sins, and you become all twisted and all, consumed by this. And even when you go to confession, many times you feel still uncomfortable. And when you're at that point, you're at the high point of scrupulosity. And you are self-judging. And this is another aspect of the problem. You are self-judging when your ability to judge has been impaired, has been distorted. The psychological crisis here is that you are lost your sense of objective judgment, and you want certainty for yourself, and you can't give certainty to yourself. So the cure is a radical cure. You have to enslave yourself to someone else's judgment. But that's uncomfortable. Now, I was going to confession and these priests were telling me, oh, look, if you don't know you're in a state of grace, just say an act of contrition and receive Holy Communion. But in my mind, the mind formed by good friends of mine who were radical traditionalist Catholics, wanting to be faithful, wanting to be full on, I could not trust such a judgment. In my mind, those priests were weak, wishy-washy, liberals, modernists, not to be trusted, and I couldn't follow that advice. That wasn't good enough for me. But what I realized later on, that advice, even though it was put to me simply and gently by some older priest, I don't know who his name, what his name was, etc., was the correct advice. Because the church does not say you have to be certain you're in a state of grace to receive Holy Communion. Anyway, you have to bind yourself to the judgment of an intelligent and spiritual director. And at first, that's very hard, because one other aspect of the scrupulous mind is pride. You don't trust someone else's judgment. You only trust your own judgment, but your own ability to judge is impaired. So you have to say to yourself, no matter what, I have to go with this judgment of my spiritual director, even though I'm uncomfortable with it, even though I might not actually believe for certain that advice is correct. And you have to go with his judgment. And the church says, even if that spiritual director is wrong, you are still free of guilt. You are still innocent, because you don't know for sure whether he's right or wrong, or whether I'm right or wrong. So for me, that was the solution. When I said something, thought something, did something, and I was determining in my own mind whether that was a mortal sin or not, I ran that past my spiritual director. And whatever he said, I bound myself to his judgment. He would say, no, it wasn't a mortal sin. Go to communion. Just say an act of contrition and go to communion. And that's what I would do. And within 2 weeks, I was totally cured. And I've never had that again. See, the theological error that I was under as well, because I was self-formed. If I had a good, intelligent spiritual director in the first place, this would never have happened. Because a good spiritual director would have said to me, you don't need to be certain that you're in a state of grace to receive communion. You can have a moral certainty, and when you have a moral certainty, judging yourself with a healthy mind, you go to communion. But if you're not sure whether you're in a state of grace or not, then you have not committed mortal sin. A sin, what are the components of a mortal sin? Grave matter, full knowledge of its gravity, and full consent. You gave full consent to do something you knew was serious, was grave matter. And only in when those three components are there together, is the sin that you've committed mortal. So if I've done something that's materially grave matter, but I'm not aware of its gravity subjectively, it's objectively grave, but I'm not subjectively aware of it, then I haven't committed mortal sin. Or if I have, I'll come to you in a moment. If I have done something which is grave matter, and I know it to be grave, but I'm not sure whether I gave full consent or not, then you haven't committed mortal sin. So when you are in doubt as to whether what you've committed is grave or whether you've given full consent, when you are in doubt, then there is no mortal sin. You just do an act of contrition and go to confession. You act of contrition and go to communion. You don't have to go to sacramental confession. Sacramental confession is for mortal sin. Now, the church says you should go minimum once a year, around Easter time or thereabouts. It's not for venial sin. It's not for small sins. That you just do an act of contrition every day and then you continue on. Right? The sacrament is there for mortal sin when you know in your informed conscience that you've committed something that's grave matter and you knew it to be grave and you gave full consent. Only then do you abstain from Holy Communion. Only then do you go to sacramental confession before receiving Holy Communion. Otherwise, when you're not sure of its gravity or you're not sure whether you gave full consent, then there's no mortal sin. You just do an act of contrition and go to Holy Communion. So your question.
I think it's a scrupulous question.
No, it's important. You'll never escape from scrupulosity unless you open up to someone that you trust and give them all the details of what plagues you, because you need to know in your own mind that you've given all the details in order to trust that person's judgment. You're not going to trust that spiritual director's judgment unless you feel that he is fully informed. If you think, he doesn't know all the facts, therefore I can't trust his judgment. You need to give all the facts. The spiritual director they're trained good. If they're trained well, they're trained to listen to be patient and gentle, to listen to everything you have to say. And you need to feel that you have told your spiritual director everything. If you don't feel that, you won't trust in their judgment. And when they make a judgment, you might feel uncomfortable with it. I'm not sure that's right. But you will tell yourself, I have to go with that. And I'm not guilty in the eyes of God.
So the question was really to do with that. What if you've asked multiple priests who got different answers? So for example, about whether something was a sin or not, and you would just go with that, what they said.
That's a very big problem, and that's a big problem today. It's a big problem in the church, but it's a big problem in other denominations and a big problem among other religions as well. I was at a Studies of Religion Day on Judaism about 6 weeks ago, and there were different rabbis presenting, and they were making it very clear to the students who were coming to this HSC preparation day that a lot of Jews rabbi shop. They rabbi shop. If they go to the rabbi, they think will give them the answer they want. And different rabbis will give different answers. And it's a problem in Catholicism. So what you have to do is that you have to settle on one priest only, one spiritual director only, that you know is faithful to church teaching. Okay? And that's not hard to work out, you know. And you're in a better situation today at your age than I was at your age. The situation in this part of Sydney, among the Maronites and the Roman Church, is a lot better locally than it was when I had Scrupulosity in 1989, I assure you. You don't realise how blessed you are. We've got plenty of good priests now compared to where we were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Things were in free fall, things were in decay. I didn't trust priests. I did have a spiritual director, Opus Dei priest from 1992, 94, and I generally trusted that priest. Yeah, certainly did. Okay, you have to find that priest that you know is faithful to church teaching and practice and bind yourself to that person and not shop anywhere else. All right?
The information has become available and easier these days because of it's in your phone.
Well, that's true as well. Absolutely. That's another benefit. But at the same time, there's a lot of dangerous material online. Dr. Google is very dangerous, Doctor. Is that correct, Doctor? Dr.
Google everything.
You'll be out of business, but all right, okay. Dr. Google, you don't Dr. Google everything about your own health, and you don't Dr. Google everything about spirituality or theology. But of course, your point is correct. There is a lot of good information out there, and at our fingertips, a lot more easily accessible than they were, 35, 40 years ago. But don't go to multiple directors. I think you're cluey enough to know whether a priest is faithful or not in their teaching. Like, you got an instinct like...
what if it's like maybe something a bit specific and you just
it needs to
ask about it again?
Yeah.
And then you've got a different answer from a different priest. You trust both of them. They're both great priests.
If they're both trustworthy and great priests, their answers should not be that radically different. Give me an example of a topic, not one that relates to you personally. Give me an example of a topic. Let's say, what contraceptive pill, for example. Since the 1960s, that's been available and it became a big issue. And, it's a very difficult matter for married people and some unmarried people, unfortunately. But, you go to a priest who's orthodox, they'll say, no, you can't use artificial contraception. You go to another priest that's, to be trustworthy and faithful. What difference would they say in their answer? What would be different in their answer? Maybe they could say that you could use it in these extreme circumstances. Well, they shouldn't be even giving that advice. Of course, there are plenty of liberal priests who completely ignore the church's teaching there and would say, don't worry about it, just use it. And you don't want to go near those priests. Okay.
I can give you an example.
Yeah, yes, please.
We had this situation here at MAM like 12 or 13 years ago. There was a massive debate between us and a priest that was saying that there is no hell and it's symbolic.
Yeah.
And the email communication had started circulating around. We had no WhatsApp back then. And,
yeah.
We stepped back at the end. We have to stop this conversation because it has created a lot of debate whether there is hell or there is no hell.
Yeah.
saying that there is no hell and sin.
And that's been going around for decades, and it's still quite prevalent. That's a teaching relating to theology. Of course, if you're going to undermine the existence of hell or teach that no one goes to hell or that people who do go to hell eventually leave hell, then you're opening the door for chaos. Because why should I fear and avoid sin? Because we're all ultimately going to go to heaven. So you're going to move people from scrupulosity or a healthy spiritual, mind to complete laxity and societal chaos and collapse. That's what's going to happen. The other big problem with the scrupulous mind, and this was the problem I had as well, is our image of God. For me, focusing on myself, I was thinking, again, without realizing it, that I was putting God in the category of an assassin. Why do I say that? Because I'm trying to lead a good life, avoid sin, and I felt that if I commit sin, I'm going to go to hell. Right? I can't commit sin. Have I committed sin? I don't know if I've committed sin. You're torturing yourself because you're fearing God. Now you should fear God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We need to bring back a little bit of more fear of God. But if we're just staying at fear, sorry, that's immature. It's completely undeveloped. St. John says, okay, go back to the Psalm. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's not the end of wisdom. All right? So it's where the spiritual life will start. My spiritual conversion started there. But St. John says in one of his small epistles, perfect love drives out all fear. So we're meant to move in our spiritual life, in our relationship with God, to a loving relationship. God as Father, not simply as judge. Now, I'm never going to say that God is not a judge. That's an extreme, that's a very, modernist, progressive extreme. I had someone at work once, a colleague, who says, I'm really troubled with this idea of judgment. Well, you've just made a judgment yourself, against judgment. All right, we're always judging. We're made to judge. We have an intellect, and an intellect is our power of judging, whether something is good or bad, right or wrong, etc. So we're always judging. But a healthy spiritual life would start with the fear of the Lord, but move towards doing right, doing good, avoiding evil out of love. When the scrupulous mind has a underdeveloped, distorted view of God, has not matured to see God as a loving Father, but sees God primarily or exclusively as judge. I've sinned, I'm going to go to hell. I've got to go to confession to avoid hell. So your view of God is very stunted, very limited. Now, we need to mature that, develop that. Hey, I'm not going to say there's no hell. I'm not going to say there's no such thing as mortal sin. I'm not going to say let's abolish fear of the Lord. I'm never going to do that. But if you're just stuck there in the fear of the Lord, trembling at every sin, worried about whether your sin is mortal or not, all knotted up, well, you need fixing. You need spiritual guidance. You need development. You need maturity. You need to grow. You need to have a healthy, loving spiritual life. So that's another reason why people fall into scrupulosity. They have either, I wouldn't say forgotten, I'd say even something more radical. They've never had a correct vision or idea of God, who he is. God, imagine a good parent. Now, when you're a child and you're growing up, you want to do what's right. And when you do wrong, you're scared that your dad or your mum's going to hit you. Okay? That's analogous to our relationship with God. We're children of God and we want to do what's right, but when we do wrong, we're afraid that God's going to punish us. But your parents, when they punish you, still love you. In fact, they punish you because they do love you. If they didn't love you, they'll just let you go and do whatever you want. Now, God is that and more. God is a parent and the perfect parent. So God created us out of love for love. And of course, he wants us to do good and avoid evil. He doesn't want us to sin. But when we sin, it's not as if he's just waiting to punish us there and then. He's not that assassin who wants to take us down as soon as we sin. He's loving and kind and patient and forgiving. And he's still working on us, drawing on us, giving us his actual graces to enlighten us and move us to repentance, to come back to be reconciled with him. So that's the other aspect. That's the other piece of the puzzle to protect us from scrupulosity or to cure us from scrupulosity, a healthy vision of God. Yes.
So I was reading tonight 1 Thessalonians, and it talked about obviously the will of God being to rejoice always and do not quench the spirit. Would scrupulosity be the opposite of doing that?
Well, you're not rejoicing when you're scrupulous. All right. And quenching the spirit here, well, the scrupulous mind is obstinate and proud without realizing it. And that has to be broken down in order to trust another in their judgment over you. Because when you're obstinate and proud, you want to be your own judge, and you're concluding that your judgment is always right. But in the scrupulous mind, your power of judgment has become distorted, right? It's impaired. It's not judging things objectively as they really are. And you can only escape from that through humility. And if you don't have that humility, well, you will be obstructing the work of the Holy Spirit to cure you. All right. So, okay. The Spirit, I've actually covered most of the points here. St. Teresa of Avila, one of the great spiritual masters of the Counter-Reformation, she stressed very strongly the importance of spiritual direction. Now, you always have a holy spiritual director. But she actually stressed what's more important is that they have to be also intelligent. You can have someone who's intelligent and not so holy, but that would still be helpful for you. Because it's the guidance that's important here. Now, of course, the best spiritual director is someone who's holy, but not just holy. Because some people, I went to priests when I was in this crisis. I went to priests who were good priests, but they had no idea how to help me. I'm not insulting them. I'd see someone one-on-one and they just were floundering. They couldn't even describe my condition, what I was in. But it was a classic case of scrupulosity, that if they were trained well, they should have recognized it and then moved me to, in the direction where I find a cure. I mean, I had lay friends of mine who identified, oh, you got scrupulosity, Robert. You can't make a judgment now. This person was correct. You have to overcome your scrupulosity. Now, this person was right about my diagnosis, but he didn't give me the cure, how to get out of it. There was another friend of mine who gave me the photocopy of the chapter from Tanqueray, which told me the cure, and the cure was slavery to someone else's judgment. Hey, that's radical and scary, isn't it? Slavery. And that's I just reread it the other day when I reread the chapter. He uses the term, you have to enslave yourself to someone else's judgment. That's not popular to do today for anybody. But again, I say, I was very pessimistic that I could be cured. But I was cured, and I was cured very quickly. I'm still prone to these issues, but I don't fall back into the hole because knowledge is power, and knowledge protects me from, falling back into this. I just know when I've said something or thought something or done something, and I'm not sure as to the gravity of it, or I'm not sure as to whether I've given full consent or not. I know now, I just do an act of contrition and go to communion. Okay? I know that if I'm not sure whether, one thing's certain here, know this for certain. If you're uncertain whether you've given full consent, then you haven't given full consent. Because when you give full consent, you'll know it for certain. That's a fact. Okay? If you're halfway through an action and you stop because you realize it's wrong, then you haven't given full consent. It'll be a sin, but only venial, not mortal. All right? Now, what have I got left here? Okay, so people get all twisted about Holy Communion. I've already given you the solution to that. People also get twisted when it comes to the sacrament of confession. Because the sacrament of confession is meant to heal. It's meant to give you peace. I regularly go to the sacrament of reconciliation or confession, or the official name is penance. I regularly go to the sacrament of penance. 100% of the time, I'm uncomfortable to do that. 100% of the time, I'm in the line there. Usually it's St. Charles. I'm uncomfortable. And my discomfort is greater these days because there are 3 ex-students I taught who are priests there, and I'm not comfortable to go to confession with them. And I did that just, 2 days ago. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Right? What am I leading up to? I'm always uncomfortable before I go to confession, but I'm always now comfortable when I come out. If you're coming out of confession uncomfortable, something's wrong. You need to come out of confession. It's meant to give you consolation, forgiveness of sins, peace of mind. Now, the scrupulous mind when it comes to confession is, do I confess everything? Did I confess everything accurately? Did I fully inform the priest? Or I'm repeating sins again and again. I'm confessing and absolved, but I'm not sure whether I'm really forgiven. Was I truly sorry for my sins? The solution is to keep it simple. The scrupulous mind and confession, this is the solution. You need to be informed that confession is only for mortal sins. Confess only those sins you think are serious. Don't confess every little thing. It's the sacrament of reconciliation is not for venial sins in a moment. It's for sins that break our relationship with God and the church, and therefore we come back into relationship with God through the church, sacrament of penance. Only confess those sins that you believe to be mortal. And say it only once and don't repeat those sins. And then at the end you say, for these and all my sins, I'm very sorry. For these and all my sins, I'm very sorry. So when I went to confession just 2 days ago, I came out, I realized I'd forgotten something. In my scrupulosity, I would have wanted to go back and confess that. No, the healthy spiritual mind says, I will confess that when I go next time. Because even though I did not confess it last Saturday, it was still confessed when I said, for these and all my sins, I'm very sorry. Because your disposition is what counts in the eyes of God. You are wanting to confess all the sins you can remember. That is sufficient. The fact that you did not confess something because you forgot is something innocent. Won't be held against you. So keep it simple. Just go to confession, confess those sins you believe to be mortal. Don't confess them once and don't repeat them. And at the bottom line, you say, for these and all my sins, I'm very sorry. That's enough. You are forgiven of everything. If after you come out, oh no, I forgot to mention that sin. Or I said I only did it 3 times when I actually did it 5 times. Don't worry about it. If you're twisted about that, you just say what you did to your spiritual director, and your spiritual director will say, don't worry about it. You said, for these and all my sins, I'm very sorry. That is sufficient. You were sincere. You did not deliberately withhold anything. If you deliberately withheld a sin that's serious, yeah, then your confession's invalid. But sometimes I deliberately withhold sins that are venial because I know the sacrament is not for venial sins. And I confess those sins just privately in my act of contrition before I receive Holy Communion. That is sufficient. Yes, your question.
I was just gonna say, like, we've been told, at least I've heard it being said a few times, like, if you go a while without going into mortal sin, you should go to confession at least for venial sins, like once a month try to go.
Yes, that's good, as long as you are in a healthy, mature psychological state. Okay, that is correct. You can still go to confession, even though in your informed Catholic conscience, you believe you have not committed mortal sin. You can still go to confession, and you can still just confess venial sins, because going to confession will give you the grace, the sacramental grace, to keep you strong. Okay? Now, am I contradicting myself? No. I'll repeat what I said. The sacrament of penance is for mortal sins. You can, though, confess venial sins. But when I'm talking about the scrupulous mind, and they're all contorted about the sacrament of confession, you have to make it simple for them. The advice you give to someone who's got scrupulosity and the sacrament of penance, just go in there, just give examination of conscience just for 5 minutes beforehand. Go in there, confess only the mortal sins, don't repeat yourself, say, for these and all my sins are very sorry, and go. When you recover, things calm down, your judgment, the clarity of your judgment returns. You can see things objectively again and judge them so. And if you believe, look, if you have a devotion like I go to confession once a month, and it just happened that I don't believe, my informed conscience, examination of conscience, I can't recall anything that I believe to have been a mortal sin. Should I miss confession this month? No, you go. It's a devotional confession. And confess those sins, venial sins. All right? You see?
Yeah.
That's. I'm actually saying you're correct. Yeah.
Robert, you mentioned Saint Teresa of Avila.
Yeah.
I knew of Saint Apostolic Movement, who also had scrupulosity.
Yeah, I don't read his books because of that. His books are massive, in tiny writing. And St. Alphonsus is the great doctor of the church for moral theology. But I don't read him because of my proneness to scrupulosity. Yeah, go ahead.
Because there were a few other saints. Do you know much about how they overcame scrupulosity?
I don't know of personal stories. I'm just giving you the textbook answer. And the reason why I'm confident in the textbook answer, because it worked for me. And I was a severe case. Put your hand up if you've ever been to sacramental confession 5 times in 6 days. No. And of course, you don't have to answer that question. It's something private. But I'm happy to say that I did, because I want to tell people that I was a severe case, and that no matter how severe you are, you can be cured. People need to be confident that they can be cured.
So I remember a story of a saint who, if I vaguely recall, I think he had a vision of, I think the devil came in the form of a beautiful woman, maybe try to seduce him.
It happens in dreams, Yeah. Sometimes dreams, you get very clear and powerful dreams, and they're enormously tempting. They are the devil or a demon actually putting an image in your imagination while you're asleep. So that's not unusual. Yeah.
I remember the saint, but he actually ran naked into a bush full of thorns.
Yeah, that was St. Francis of Assisi. Or St. Thomas Aquinas had a similar story. So St. Francis of Assisi was so tempted. I mean, I just come back from Italy, and we've been beautifully drowned in Dominican and Franciscan history and spirituality and saints. And so we were exposed regularly to St. Francis of Assisi, St. Dominic, St. Thomas Aquinas. And when we admire saints, of course, we've put them on a pedestal, but we can't forget that they are human beings and normal human beings and born sinners and live sinful lives. Like I know a very faithful Franciscan who's told me, we're not sure that St. Francis remained a virgin, because before his conversion, he was a bit of a happy-go-lucky guy who was, very wealthy family or middle-class wealthy family and in the military, and that type of combination is not a spiritually healthy combination. But whether or not he remained a virgin, he became one of the greatest saints in the history of the church. Like St. Augustine too, he had multiple de facto relationships. That's 2 successive ones. Okay, so and he was famous for saying, "God or Lord, make me chaste, but not quite yet."
But running into a bush full of thorns.
Yeah, well, very, very radical, very medieval, and something to be admired, but not necessarily imitated, as we say.
Scrupulous, but more radical.
But the reality is, we have to, in those circumstances, we don't have to throw ourselves into a thorn bush, but we do have to practice custody of the eyes, of the senses. So we do have to turn away, and that none of us are immune to that. And it's a necessary self-discipline, and I practice it every day. If I'm scrolling through something, Instagram, or watching something on TV, or whatever, and you just go on the website. You're looking at newspapers, so-called conservative newspapers like Daily Telegraph or Fox News or something. It's the Murdoch Empire. The Murdoch Empire is a soft porn empire. Right. So, they always got stories about, this, some American, blonde bombshell in her 50s in a sizzling bikini. I don't want to know about it, but when you get exposed to that, you have to, in your heart and your mind, turn away. You don't have to throw yourself into a thorn bush, but you have to do something spiritually equivalent. Okay, something spiritually equivalent. St. Thomas Aquinas, his family did not want him to join the lowly Dominicans. They had another vision of him being an abbot of a Benedictine monastery, very prestigious and blah, blah, blah. So when he joined the Dominicans, he was kidnapped and then imprisoned. And to turn him away from that vocation, they introduced a prostitute into his room, and he chased her out with a burning spike from the fireplace. And once he closed the door, he etched into the door with this burning spike cross, it's radical, but necessary for him at that time. Okay, and that's something that's not just to be admired, but can be imitated. But you've got to be careful these days. You might end up being charged with assault if you did something like that today. But whatever.
Do you think that excessively scrupulous mind was at the heart, the foundation of what happened to Martin Luther?
He was scrupulous, yeah. He was not at peace when he came out of confession. This is what the biographers tell us. I don't know what the sources are. I've got Grise. Grise has a 6-volume biography and history of Martin Luther and Lutheranism, and that's the Catholic authority on him. I've never read it, even though I've got it on my shelf. But it seems to be that, Luther was struggling for peace of mind, peace of soul. So all these prayers and penances or whatever and sacramental confessions never gave him that peace. So therefore he concluded that wasn't the way forward. And the way forward was simply faith alone. Justifies you, and that's all you need. While the Catholic Church says faith is necessary for salvation, but it must be a faith that works itself out in love, as St. Paul says, Galatians 5:6, and other verses that are important. I think he did suffer from it. Look, what are the benefits if you've got scrupulosity? If you can be cured of scrupulosity, you now come down and settle to a plane where, hopefully you're healthy and you're aware of sin, You struggle against sin. You do good and avoid evil. You learn humility. You learn obedience. These are the values of having recovered, that you gain from a recovering person out, being delivered from scrupulosity. You must never lose your sense of sin. You must never lose your combativeness to resist sin. You must always strive to do good and avoid evil. But you need a healthy mind to give you right judgment as to the gravity of what you've thought or said or did, to judge that correctly so you don't get all knotted up. And you should all have you should all have a spiritual director. It can be, not normally, you've heard me talk tonight that it's a priest, it's a male, it's a man, okay, ordinarily so. But sometimes you can have other advisors, intelligent people, lay people, male or female, who can help you here from an intellectual point of view. Like, I'm a lay person. I'm not a priest. I'm not a deacon. I'm giving you advice that's helpful at an intellectual level as to how to deal with scrupulosity. Some people have come to me in the past and they said, oh, look, I've done this. This is a mortal sin. And I can judge it for them and say, tell me this, tell me that, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, look, it's not a mortal sin. Just confess it and go to confession. And that person is, if I'm wrong in my advice, at least I'm sincere in the eyes of God. I'm not intending to deceive. And that person is also guiltless in the eyes of God because they are innocently trusting in someone else's advice. So it's all good. All right. Well, I think I've covered everything looking at my notes, but I'm happy to take any further questions. Just one last point here. Yeah, you need to trust the authority. When I was a traditionalist thinker, and I'm not, it's not that I'm no longer traditionalist. I don't like those labels. Conservative, traditionalist. I only accept two labels, Catholic and Maronite. They're the only. So if you're authentically Catholic, that's it. You're conservative, you're traditional, you're Catholic. That's it. All right. We, as a faithful Catholic, you have to generally, embrace and respect authority. That should come natural to us because that's the whole church has authority. Because authority comes from God through Christ, sets up a church, has leadership, hierarchy, the episcopate, the priesthood, etc. And though when we are obstinate, when we are hyper scrupulous, we are obstinate, that's pride, and that resists authority. So I think I've already said that anyway. We'll leave it at that. I'm open to any other questions. Your questions so far have been very good. But don't hold back and don't be embarrassed because you're never going to escape the scrupulous condition unless you reveal everything. Remember what I said earlier? You need to reveal everything to your spiritual director because that's the only way you're going to trust in that person's answer. But okay, you're not going to have a session with me right now relating to your personal issues, but I'm happy to take any other general questions if there are any left.
Is there a lot of cases of
As I said in the beginning, I would say that as a percentage of the population and the church's population, it's not a high percentage, but a percentage, it is a significant percentage of faithful practicing Catholics. When I mean significant, I can't give you a specific number, but scrupulosity is found among people who are practicing, who are faithful, who are intent on doing good and avoiding evil and avoiding sin. All right? You're not going to get scrupulosity among people who don't practice, who don't believe, who don't care, who are happy-go-lucky and, love, just believe to, do whatever you want and don't worry, Yes.
Slightly different question. Forgive my ignorance on this, but I understand that you were a high school teacher.
That's correct.
What are you currently doing? Like, what's most of your life?
At the moment, I'm working Sydney Catholic Schools office. I'm manager of staff faith formation and youth ministry. So my chief role is staff faith formation, and my secondary role, that is by way of time, is events for youth ministry. I love my job. If they took away the bureaucracy, it would be the perfect job. But yeah, so I was 15 years as a school teacher at St Charbel's College from 1990 to 2005. I had a year off. I was seconded elsewhere during that time. And when I retire either retire or sacked from my current role, I don't know what will come first, okay, or retrenched or whatever, I plan to go back to be part-time teacher. I don't believe in retirement. You know, I think that's a modern thing that is also psychologically deleterious for the human condition. You know, I just digressing here now that you touched on that. You know, you hear a lot about what's happening to people when they enter retirement, and some people fall into anxiety and depression and early death. What's gone wrong? I mean, they had very successful careers in business or finance or the world. They've stacked up a lot of money in their bank account, a lot of money in their superannuation. Okay, life's good now. They're 60, 65, or some retire at 55. You know, they've got their golf club membership, and they're doing their cruises and their holidays, and they're on various boards of companies. And what's gone wrong? You know what's gone wrong? What are older people really made for? To be grandparents. That's what's missing. Their children, they're not around. They're backpacking somewhere, or they're shacking up with some boyfriend somewhere and whatever, or girlfriend somewhere, or they're not having children. They're all scattered to the four winds and whatever. Things are broken down. People in their older age are meant to find their purpose as grandparents. And we've thrown that out. We've ditched everything. And the sexual revolution has been totally destructive of marriage, family, nuclear family, extended family, birth rates, you name it. Whatever it is, the sexual revolution has touched and damaged or destroyed. If we were a healthy, organic society again, these people, and I'm entering that phase now. I'm 61. I could retire. The only reason why I don't retire is I want to help my children buy homes. I've got enough money for myself, you know. But I want to help them. And so I'm in that phase now. I'm 61. I could retire now. And I know if I just want to, I would fall into depression if I didn't have a faith life that was family-based and looking forward to being a grandparent. I could do the things I do, teach in the classroom, give talks, write books, yeah, and they'll give me some, purpose and meaning, because you need purpose and meaning. But we're really made to be grandparents and get the joy from that, and to play an important part in the raising of your children's children. It's not just the nuclear family. Nuclear family is a good thing, and that's also been destroyed. But it's not meant to be just nuclear. It's meant to be extended. We look at our old country, Lebanon, or Italy or Greece, whatever, these Mediterranean countries, and we see the villages and we think that they're old-fashioned. But villages grew as organic developments of extended families, conglomerations of extended families. This is the natural order. This is what's organic. And this all came apart slowly, people leaving the village, industrialization, leaving the farm, leaving the village, going to the big cities, you know, and we see this as natural progress, and then or immigrating to other countries around the world. So, you know, gradually the extended family was, you know, whittled down, etc. So, if I was to propose this as the solution, you'd be hounded out of town.
It's interesting you say that because I'm a bit of a politics and economics nerd. I love reading and into what's happening around the world. And a lot of the world's problems today, political and economic problems, stem from that sexual revolution. It's very controversial to go and say it, but when you look at countries like Japan that have lost 900,000 people in the last year through death and lowering birth rates, and then you look at the fact that there's no one to do the jobs, no one to pay the taxes, to pay for the elderly population, everyone's in budget deficits. You know, throw on top of that, you know, no one's having families and kids anymore. It all stems, but then the same people that promote that, you know, they're sort of contradicting themselves in what they're doing. So
You're spot on. Now we've moved away from scrupulosity, and that's my fault, not yours. But I'll just say one other thing touching on this, and if there's no other questions about the issue of scrupulosity, we'll move on. But, you know, when I bought my first home in 1987, it cost me 5 times the salary of a first-year law clerk. All right? For my oldest son to buy the same house today, which is in Chullora, Como Avenue, it would cost him 17 times his first year's salary as an engineer. Right? What's gone wrong? It's madness. A country this size with a small population should not have such, you know, uncontrolled inflation when it comes to house prices. But I was at a talk maybe 20 years ago. A professor, economics professor from UTS, who was a very strong Catholic, basically linked the escalation of house prices in Australia. Listen to this, to the contraceptive pill. Because the acceleration started in 1971, according to this graph. When you've got a contraceptive mentality, what you're doing is that you're limiting your birth rate to 2 or less, so that the wife, the mother, is spending less years as a carer and more years as an economic earner, so that the combined wealth of the family is greater. Their expenses are less because they have less children. Expenses are less, income is greater, so they could bid more for homes. And that's what's driving it. It's auctions more than anything driving up the price of homes, because that's driven up by people's ability to pay. And if they're earning more, they can bid more, and that's what's driving it up to levels now that are just beyond the reach of ordinary people. I don't know how young people today are going to buy homes. My first home was $87,000. That home today is about 1.6, 1.7 million. How can people graduating from university on $80,000 a year afford to pay mortgages of more than $1 million and do it in a good amount of years? And that is a consequence of not following church moral teaching. That's what's happened. All right. You had a question, sir. Yeah.
So, in terms of having one spiritual director, a scripture comes to my mind from the Old Testament, Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 5. Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in men. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, how can I trust one man? And I know you said that God will, you know, be forgiving if he gives them the wrong advice, but
Well, okay, let me give you a response to that. So was Jeremiah including himself in that condemnation? Because he was asking the king, successive kings to trust in him as an oracle of God, wasn't he? Okay? And they didn't, and therefore Judah was destroyed. So what Jeremiah is saying, the spirit of what he's saying, is that cursed is the man who trusts in man rather, that is, man in his own thinking, in his own strength, and not trusting in God. And God here includes the legitimate authority that God sets up. I mean, when Jesus Christ says to St. Peter, you are rock, on this rock I'll build my church, the gates of hell will not prevail, I'll give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. And in chapter 18, he says to the other disciples, he gives them the power to bind and loose. Aren't other Christians meant to respect and obey that governing authority that Christ sets up? I mean, here we have St. Paul writing letters to communities expecting to be obeyed and listened to. And he's a man, we're trusting in him. So Jeremiah is not condemning the idea of faithful believers in God, trusting in those oracles that God sends, those prophets, those apostles, those who are of legitimate authority. It's people thinking that in Jeremiah's time, we could ward off Babylon through our own strength. We could ward off Babylon through local alliances with Moab and Edom and Ammon and Aram and Egypt. That's the problem. When Jeremiah is preaching, he says, if you want to avoid destruction from Babylon, then repent, throw off your idols, come back to Yahweh, be faithful to the Mosaic covenant, okay? Don't trust, that's the spirit of what he's saying. Yeah, over here.
You said what I was going to say, but I've got a question about scrupulosity.
Yeah, well, that is the topic, so it's allowed. Yeah.
Does it apply in the opposite direction? Can you be like too scrupulous with righteousness? For example, like being too hard on yourself about something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Not necessarily think is a sin, but what you could maybe do.
You could do too much by way of prayer, too much by way of penance. You have to also temper yourself with that. You shouldn't do more prayer, penance, vigils, readings, or whatever. Beyond that would be inconsistent with your calling in life. So, for example, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I have a job. I shouldn't be praying and doing things that are going to impair those aspects of my life. You know, my role as husband, my role as father, my role in my work. You see, so you can go to the extreme where you're doing too much spiritually. St. Teresa of Avila says something here again, which is very important. She says that the devil gets most people by pushing them off the left side and making people lazy and do nothing. That's how the majority fall. But the devil also gets some people by making them to do too much. When they do too much, they end up doing everything badly. Okay? So when you say too righteous, I interpret that to mean trying to do too much religiously.
I'm not sure. Half of it means that, half of it means like we're taught a lot like disconnect from the world sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Those disconnect from worldly pleasures, all
Yeah.
those sorts of things.
Well, not all worldly pleasures are sinful. There are pleasures attached to natural things, like eating, drinking, sexuality. We are made for pleasure. It's just that we need to put them in the proper context. Eating and drinking cannot go to the point where we're engaging in gluttony or drunkenness. And sexual pleasure has to be within the context of marriage, permanent relationship, one-on-one until death. So we can have pleasure. Worldly pleasures are discouraged or to be avoided if they lead towards sin. Okay. Is watching football a worldly pleasure? Supporting certain football teams would be sinful. Yes, I'll say that. But if watching a rugby league game, is that a worldly pleasure? Yes. by itself, it's not a sin, but I can go into excess and it can become sinful. I can do too much of it. I can be obsessed. Yeah, it becomes your idol. It becomes everything you think about, everything you worry about, everything you talk about, everything you do. It's just around rugby league. Number one, you go to church, all you do is talk about rugby league. I've seen that. I've seen that in the past. Maybe in the present, but worldly pleasures. Some of them are inherently good, but they become sinful when we engage in them excessively. They become obsessions. They distract us. They consume us. That's why I've got my own personal rules about rugby league, for example. How much I watch, how much I get interested in, because I know that can drag me to obsession. So I put limits on it. Well, when you support the team, I support. It's easy to become detached. Yeah. I support the Rabbitohs. 51 years of pain. Anyway, that's all right. Okay, so it's easy to be detached from them. All right, can we wrap up now? Is there any other questions relating to scrupulosity?
Robert.
Yes.
Robert, it's me on the...
Yeah, Anthony. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. You said if you're not aware, if you're in a state of grace, you say active contrition.
If you're unsure, you can never be absolutely sure. Only God has absolute certainty about whether you're in a state of grace or not. But you can have a moral certainty. You can examine yourself like St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 4:4. I examine myself, there's nothing that accuses me, but it's the Lord who judges me. We're meant to examine ourselves, and we can have a clear conscience, a good conscience. And that is sufficient to go to communion. If you're confused, if you're not sure about your spiritual condition, it's simple. Do an act of contrition and go to communion. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
And there's no other answer. You've got to trust in that answer and not presume that I'm wrong, I'm giving some liberal, weak, wishy-washy answer. Okay? When you're not sure, then we're not talking about mortal sin, because mortal sin only comes into play when you have full knowledge and you've given full consent and you're aware that you've given full consent. Okay? All right. We'll finish there. Well, thank you very much.
Everyone online done? Thank you. We don't have a big boss today.